Qin Feng yanked Zhou Hao aside and punched the tiny Fang infant. His speed was much slower than that of the tiny Fang infant, but it seemed like a coincidence. As he swung his fist, the tiny Fang infant offered its head as a target. Bang! The sound echoed like a melon splitting open, with red and white brain matter splattering out. Qin Feng furrowed his brow, not because of the gruesome scene, but because his knuckles had already broken from the intense impact, revealing raw flesh beneath. Too weak. Such a frail body. When did this happen that he couldn't remember? But Qin Feng's eyes narrowed, his brown irises deepening to a pitch-black like night, exuding an invisible energy that seeped into his body through the tiny Fang infant. The wound on his hand quickly scabbed over, peeled off, and healed as if it had never been injured. This was Qin Feng's innate talent. Ingestion. Qin Feng's expression betrayed a hint of shock and excitement. In his memories, his past self had believed that awakening an ability would make him invincible, so he boasted about it, only to end up with the talent stolen from him. He now relied on just one ability, ingesting dead monsters to strengthen himself. This was already enough for him to barely survive. But if his innate talent hadn't been wasted, did this mean he had become stronger? Qin Feng felt that by absorbing the energy of the tiny Fang infant, his physical body had grown significantly stronger. Even 10 such infants could bring about a significant leap, allowing his body to reach G2 stage. Why wait any longer? Qin Feng felt like he hadn't been this excited in a long time. From afar, another tiny Fang infant, enraged by the sight of its kin dying, dived towards them. 2 tiny Fang infants surrounded Qin Feng from left and right. Qin Feng retreated to avoid being caught in an encirclement. He reached into his waistband. The small dagger, barely 10 centimeters long, appeared in his hand. As one of the tiny Fang infants pounced, a flash of cold light emerged. Puff! In an instant, Qin Feng sliced through one of the tiny Fang infant's neck. The little body slumped down, its head and neck almost hanging by a thread. Blood spattered everywhere. Qin Feng kicked the second tiny Fang infant, forcing it to retreat 3 meters. Taking no chances, Qin Feng lunged forward with his dagger. One swift strike killed the tiny Fang infant, piercing through its chest. He felt the dagger sink into the ground's hardness. Ah! Noticing the commotion, another tiny Fang infant let out a shrill cry, sounding like a cat's meow mixed with an infant's wail. Several more tiny Fang infants rushed over. Qin Feng remained calm, calculating their movements and striking them one by one. His combat experience was unparalleled. Dealing with these tiny Fang infants was no problem. However, his body couldn't keep up. Tiny Fang infants pounced from all directions, eager to tear him apart. Snap! One of the tiny Fang infants bit into Qin Feng's leg, causing a sharp pain. His calf seemed to be being pierced through, but this wasn't the worst. Another tiny Fang infant lunged at his throat. In that moment, Qin Feng's face changed as he raised his arm to block it. The tiny Fang infant's sharp teeth bit into his arm but saved his neck from harm. Die! Qin Feng roared and swung his arm hard against the ground. A Chinese letter echoed as a cracking sound filled the air. The tiny Fang infant hanging on his arm was nearly flattened by the impact. At this moment, another one seized its opportunity and leaped. Its attack was precise, and it pounced in an ideal position to swallow Qin Feng's head whole. Qin Feng's eyes narrowed sharply. Suddenly, a white baseball bat flew over and repelled that tiny Fang infant. Zhou Hao appeared before Qin Feng, trembling but not stopping. He turned around and used the baseball bat to strike the monster near his feet. Let go, beast monster. Let go. However, this time he didn't have the earlier ferocity. He was afraid of hurting Qin Feng. After a few strikes, the tiny Fang infant's head finally shattered under Zhou Hao's blows. Qin Feng kicked it away and sent it flying. His injuries healed quickly, but his appearance showed severe damage. Zhou Hao trembled, adrenaline pumping through his body as he took in deep breaths of fresh air. How thrilling! In just a moment, seeing the wounds on Qin Feng's body still left Zhou Hao stunned. Qin Feng, are you all right? I'm fine, Qin Feng shook his head. Meanwhile, the patrol team had arrived and dispersed the crowd, securing the street. Do we leave now? Zhou Hao was unsure of what to do in this situation. No need, Qin Feng shook his head. Only one fisher appeared here. With the patrol team around, there's no danger. Indeed, only one fisher appeared here. But in the past life, Qin Feng hadn't been present. This led to the tiny Fang infant scattering and killing many people, including Zhou Hao. Fortunately, all of that was over now. At this moment, the light from the spatial stabilizer above flickered out before emitting a silver glow. As this light descended, the fissure in front of Qin Feng and Zhou Hao began to shrink until it vanished entirely. Zhou Hao had never seen such a scene before. His face showed shock and curiosity. In reality, if they truly awakened their abilities, this would be a common occurrence in the future. Beep beep, Street 12 has been cleared. Now counting casualties. 13 dead, injured are being counted. All clear. The patrol team confirmed the number of deaths as Qin Feng watched coldly without moving. Zhou Hao, however, returned to his senses from his earlier excitement, his face growing pale. In just a moment, 13 people had died. If not for Qin Feng, more might have perished. A man with a patrol badge approached Qin Feng. The patrol team were the police of the settlement. Everyone possessed immense destructive power, and disputes could easily turn into one-sided slaughters between the strong and weak. Thus, the patrol team existed to maintain order and protect the settlement's safety. Sometimes, the settlement wasn't entirely safe. Those tiny Fang infants you two killed. Good job. Heroes emerge from youth. The man smiled, his face roundish despite being only about 170 centimeters tall. Qin Feng didn't underestimate him for a moment. This man wore a medal on his chest, bearing an F1 logo. This indicated that he was at least 10 stages stronger than Qin Feng and Zhou Hao. Of course, compared to his Qin Feng from another life, this didn't count for much. However, besides the F-level insignia, this man also had a patrol team deputy captain's medal. The patrol team represented official forces in the gathering grounds. They couldn't afford to be careless. No, these are all Qin Feng's achievements. Zhou Hao, seeing an official from the patrol team approach, blurted out immediately without waiting for him to ask. He didn't want to take any of this credit. That man naturally knew that everything was Qin Feng's doing. The surveillance video had already told him so. Very well, you're Qin Feng. I'm Zhu Xingfu, Deputy Captain of Patrol Team 12 in the gathering grounds. Qin Feng raised an eyebrow at hearing his name. Zhu Xingfu. This person seemed to be a notorious merchant in the imperial capital 10 years later. He never expected that this man was once just a patrol team deputy captain. Hello, Qin Feng nodded. Zhu Xingfu smiled warmly, but his eyes gleamed with sharpness as he said gently, I'm grateful for your help. In one sentence, it transformed Qin Feng's life-or-death struggle into mere assistance. A crack appeared in the ground. Anytime a threat to the gathering grounds emerged, those who went out to neutralize it would receive special rewards. And this was such an extremely dangerous matter, but Qin Feng didn't expose him. We just fought back, otherwise we'd be dead. Zhu Xingfu still smiled, but he felt a bit suspicious. He thought that Qin Feng's calmness was too much. Indeed, the sharp-toothed infants you killed can provide materials for collection and sale. However, since you're young, selling them alone would be quite disadvantageous. Qin Feng chuckled meaningfully. If only Zhou Hao were standing there, he might have been deceived by Zhu Xingfu. The teeth and heartblood weren't worth much in terms of price, but the entire corpse counted as a contribution. With some manipulation, Zhu Xingfu could claim that these were his kills. These were all behind-the-scenes deals. In this world where strength ruled, what powerful people said went. Qin Feng didn't beat around the bush. He simply said, 8 corpses for 8 vials of G-level enhancement potion. Zhu Xingfu's smile froze momentarily as he became more alert. G-level enhancement potions weren't expensive, only 1,000 per vial. But in the gathering grounds, ordinary people earned only about 1,000 on average. 8 vials would be 80,000. However, as an official, Zhu Xingfu had internal prices and could save half the cost. 40,000 was exactly what Qin Feng's sharp-toothed infant had earned him. Was this too coincidental? Anyway, you won't lose out, Qin Feng added. This made Zhu Xingfu hesitate to test him further. It seemed that this kid really knew. All right, here they are. Thank you, Captain Zhu, Qin Feng said coolly as he accepted the potions. Ha ha ha, no need to thank me. You're doing well. If there's anything good in the future, come find me. Zhu Xingfu added a communication device to Qin Feng's list, hoping it might be useful later. Moreover, being able to kill sharp-toothed infants now meant he would have high combat strength in the future. Perhaps he could use this connection. Zhu Xingfu was already showing signs of becoming a merchant, even though he hadn't started yet. Qin Feng divided 8 vials of potion between Zhou Hao and himself. Zhou Hao stared at the items they had previously only dreamed about. Why do you have so many? Aren't enhancement potions expensive? Zhou Hao asked curiously. The patrol team offers half price. Wow, the patrol team is really generous. It's official power. If we could join one day, that would be great. If you want to join, of course you can. Qin Feng nodded. Zhou Hao had died for him in a previous life, and Qin Feng wouldn't let his brother down. As for Chen Ming, perhaps people changed their minds, or perhaps the loss of a brother blinded Qin Feng's eyes, making him fail to see this backstabber. Wait, Qin Feng, keep these too. I can't use them all. Besides, I only killed 2. If you hadn't saved me just now, I would have died. Zhou Hao pushed 2 vials back to Qin Feng. When you awaken your abilities or ancient martial arts potential, you'll earn more, Qin Feng said as he pushed the potions back. These weren't very useful for him since he had naturally awakened his abilities. After all, he didn't give them all to Zhou Hao to avoid arousing suspicion. Qin Feng wasn't going to mention rebirth. Okay, bro, when I awaken, don't just ask for G level. If you need a level, I'll buy it for you, Zhou Hao said confidently. Of course, this was just the irresponsible boasting of a young man. There were only so many level enhancement potions each year. The two continued talking as a medical vehicle finally arrived at the scene to treat the injured. Qin Feng received hero-like treatment for helping repel the sharp-toothed infant. No, I can handle it myself. Go check on those who are more severely hurt. I'm fine. Qin Feng stopped the nurse and quickly bandaged himself with gauze. The nurse nodded in recognition of his familiar movements and went to attend to others. On a battlefield, every second counted, and the gatherers were tough enough that minor injuries weren't a big deal. No one knew that these were all due to Qin Feng's rapid healing abilities. Since the medical vehicle was small, Zhou Hao didn't follow. When Qin Feng came out again, his arm and leg were wrapped in bandages. Zhou Hao felt sorry for him. Qin Feng, you had quite a bad day today, Zhou Hao muttered. First I fainted this morning, now I've been bitten by the sharp-toothed infant. Maybe I should ask a light element ability user to bless me, he said half-jokingly. Light element ability users are so easy to find. Qin Feng laughed. He didn't feel unlucky. On the contrary, he felt incredibly lucky. How many people could have another chance at life after death? Well, I was just saying, Zhou Hao smiled bitterly. Yeah, right. By the way, I still have something to do. You can go back to school. Qin Feng stopped and didn't walk with Zhou Hao. Qin Feng, you're going to work. Don't bother. Now's a good time for awakening, so don't delay, Zhou Hao said, reminding Qin Feng of his job from 10 years ago. Zhou Hao's parents were alive, and he had an older brother. Although they were ordinary people in the gathering grounds, they had decent jobs that could support Zhou Hao.